Oh, sounds good.
Hey, yeah, we're super excited to invite my friend Mitch Tidwell on with us, and we're going to have a conversation over the next few minutes just about this idea of collegiate church planting. And this is something that that is in Mitch's wheelhouse, as they've been working to some of this stuff down here in Texas. And so really excited to have you with us here, Mitch, today. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Let us know who you are, what you're doing, what you're up to, a little bit of your background.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Andy, Ben. Appreciate you guys having me on. It's been a joy to get to know you, Andy, and kind of collaborate. I know it's been super helpful just for me and our ministry with SVTC Collegiate. But I'm from Fort Worth, Texas, born and raised here, and I work for the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. Been doing that for about 9 years, and for the last 4.5, I have led our collegiate ministries. And so part of that is what we call a Roundup Network, which is a network of collegiate leaders here in Texas that we kind of gather together to help do ministry basically better, to kind of create a think tank and a collaboration kind of community to help do ministry together. Also, hey, side note, on a personal note, I have a wife, Olivia, who I've been married to for 3 years, and a son, William, who is about 8 months old. So those are my two passions: my family and really collegiate ministry, or helping collegiate leaders. I got a dog named Luke who's 12 years old as well. So
Yeah.
that's me.
Yeah, it was fun because so Mitch and I ended up getting connected. We were both featured writers for the Collegiate Collective, and that was even pre us moving to Texas. And so I remember when I was coming down, contacted Mitch and just said, "Hey, I'm moving down," and Mitch said, "Oh, let's get together." And it's been a fun collaboration over these last 3 years. So
Man, it has.
yeah, it's been good. Cool. So here's what I want to throw on the table first is when, for you, Mitch, when did you get introduced to the idea of collegiate church planting?
Man, so my very first day as collegiate associate for the organization I work for, I was told, "Hey, there's an event that you're putting on that's already happening, and you just kind of need to go be there." And so my very first day on the job, I'm already an event that my ministry is putting on. And the person leading it is a guy named Brian Fry, who was formerly National Collegiate Director for the North American Mission Board, which is the Southern Baptist Convention. And that really friendship really kind of changed the trajectory of how, of really me thinking about college ministry. Leading up to that, I began to pray this prayer of like, God, because really what I was tasked with, because my job falls under our evangelism team, is helping churches reach college students with the gospel. And so I'm like, how do we do that? Do we just hand out tracts to students and tell them to run onto a campus and pass out as many as they can?
Yes, that's the answer.
What is it? What do we need to do? Do we, put tracts in helium balloons and hopefully they pop over a campus and they drop, kind of thing? So I was thinking about all that kind of stuff. And really, as I began to meet Brian Fry, was really an answer to my prayer, because he helped add just a lot of framework for me to help think, how do we reach students on a significant scale, but not just for this one and done, hey, they're saved, now what's next, but thinking of a robust way of reaching and making disciples that will actually multiply. And so he invited me to this event he puts on called Hitchhikers. It was up in Ames, Iowa, which I know that you've been up there, Andy. And really it showcased a ministry, Cornerstone Church, who has perhaps the largest college ministry in the U.S. with Salt Company. And they casted this vision of how they as a church had emphasized reaching the next generation, particularly the college campus, which is there at Ames, Iowa, and and how they realized that, hey, we have all these students that are coming, literally thousands. What if we mobilize them and we planted churches with them all across these major university campuses in the North, in the Midwest? And that just really captured, and I began to see these pockets of this happening from Midwest to the Pacific Northwest with Resonate, probably the more Eastern Midwest with H2O Network, even Grace Point out in California, and some different places like that. And I realized, like, man, I really think if we want to reach the next generation, planting a church is a great way to do that, because you're planting a church that has an emphasis on reaching college students. And and you guys know this because you guys work with churches, but I feel like that, a church that, I don't know, when a church is holistically about reaching college students, they just reach more students. If the college ministry is just kind of an arm to the church that's on the lower end, it's not a high priority, there's just always going to be a ceiling on it. And so I wanted to invest in churches that really were going to make it a priority, and being a collegiate church plant makes it really that priority. So that's kind of how I was introduced to it, was through Brian, through that event. And I just realized, like, this is where we need to put our dollars. This is where we need to put our time and energy and all that.
That's good. Yeah. For me, even, I remember because Brian invited me to a hitchhikers event, and where we met that first time. And I probably came more for the networking and relationships, super skeptical of this idea of collegiate church planting, just like, okay, like, what is this? And part of it is I didn't really understand what it was about. And we'll get to even some of those maybe kind of misconceptions as we begin to move forward. I don't know, anything you want to add, Ben, or questions you got before we jump into next one?
No, I don't think so. I mean, so for me, I think I've heard the term collegiate church planting. I'm familiar with the concept, but never really looked into it much or had like a direct conversation about it. So this is kind of interesting for me to hear, even despite the fact that I've been in the college and young adult ministry area for 12, 13 years now. So it's a new field for me, but it's exciting. I like the idea.
Yeah. So why don't you kind of define, like, what is collegiate church planting?
Yeah, I would say that a collegiate church plant is a church that you're planting. You're starting something new, typically within the close proximity to a college campus, and college students are probably in your top 2 to 3 priorities of your church, as far as an emphasis on where you're spearheading your resources and what you're doing. And I would say if your church is probably 40 to 50% or more college students, that is a collegiate church plant. You'd be considered, I would consider you a collegiate church plant by those. So 40+% students, it's in your top 2, emphasis of your church. I mean, for instance, I met with a guy 2 weeks ago at Sin Summit who's planted next to a college campus, and he considers himself a collegiate church plant. He hasn't started reaching students yet, but that is an emphasis. Like, that's one of his top 2 priorities. And so he identifies himself that way in the community, the people, because he's got a good base of community folks. By community folks, I mean families and things like that, or people that are in their careers, that they're behind it. They're like, hey, yeah, this is what we do as a church. We reach the next generation.
Yeah, because I think that's a big, I think for me, even thinking about being introduced to those ideas for the first time, there was a lot of misconceptions that I had about what collegiate church planting was, because you hear that and you're like, oh, if they're only focusing on, college students, they don't have anybody. So if you graduate, you got to get kicked out of the church, or all these kind of misconceptions. So what other things would you maybe say that it's not? How would you kind of even further define those two things in terms of, as people are kind of like listening maybe or exploring for the first time, how do you help kind of take away some of those things that they're questions they might have?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions, like you said, about collegiate church planting is the thing it's just all entirely college students. And that's really, I wouldn't call I would say it's maybe even more of a ministry than maybe even an expression of church. I mean, you could argue that. If someone wanted to argue against it, I wouldn't probably argue back. But I think it's not just college students, because I think if we're thinking long-lasting church, obviously we need to have the generations represented. So I think there's this aspect of, when you're planning a collegiate church, yes, the next generation college students are the emphasis, but having the community behind it, I think, is very significant and helpful as well. So I think those are the 2 pieces that you got to have. I say you got to have, I mean, I know of some churches specifically up in the Pacific Northwest that they're probably 80% college students. Like, there's not a lot of community backing. They would consider themselves a collegiate church plant. Now, I think probably what will happen is I think what their idea is that, hey, some of these people are going to stay here. And so over time, this church is actually going to grow into a multi-generational church. It's just going to have a longer runway and not be that right at the forefront. So I would still say that's a viable collegiate church plan. I would still define it as that way. But honestly, if you're really not going to include the community into that, then, there's really, you're kind of operating like a parachurch ministry similarly, where it's just one generation that's kind of being represented there. And I don't know that is really helpful long-term for the life of a student or a young person.
Yeah. Because that's where I hear a lot of the pushback, right?
Yeah.
When I think a lot of pastors hear that it's not multi-generational. You can't really have elders. You think of all those kind of maybe ideas of what we think church needs to look like. And we look at a collegiate church and say, it can't have those things. And so I think it's important to even hear some of those misconceptions.
I would guess the one other thing that, like, by default, hearing the term collegiate church plant, I would assume, this is like, I'm thinking someone who's maybe thinking critically would be assuming that it's on a college campus or must be like immediately adjacent to a college campus. I'm assuming that that's not actually the case. Like that would probably being close to a college campus is going to be ideal, but you could have, maybe in a city where there's one college campus, you could have a church on the other side of the city that said, hey, we're going to adopt or, focus on this campus, and it would still be, legitimately, you could say this is a collegiate church plant because they're focused on reaching this campus, even if they're not next door to it.
Yeah, totally, man. I think even when you look at the stats in Texas, you got 1.5 million college students. Probably almost 800,000 of those are in 2-year schools, which are in wouldn't be considered college areas or college neighborhoods or things like that. And so you could perhaps even have a collegiate church plant that is in a place that is not a big 4-year school or, that type of thing. So I think that's totally true, Ben.
That's good. That's good. I'm curious then, what did you give maybe, and you started this a little bit with your story, you as a leader of the college ministry down here at Southern Baptist, you've really pushed this to the forefront of something that you want to be an integral part of what you're doing. What is the why behind that? Why do you think it's so strategic to put a lot of your energy and your focus into collegiate church planning right now?
Man, dude, I when I got the job, that when I prayed, I asked God, what is it that you want me to do? Because I didn't really have a great college background. I had for a year been a part of a college career ministry, leading it in a suburban church. Sorry, I think my son's yelling in the background. A suburban church, and with about 25 students. And it was we were like, well, we have college kids, but then we have like school teachers and people that are accountants. And it was just this kind of weird. And so I was just still figuring this out when this, I was advised, hey, you ought to really apply for this job. And so I think I was at a place when I was where I realized my neediness and like, God, I really can't do this. And I can't figure this out. I mean, this is not like a wheelhouse place for me. I'm in a place of being poor in spirit and needy, of like, if you don't do something, if you don't give me something, this is going to be an absolute train wreck and I'm going to lose my job. And the question and the thing that kept coming to my mind as I was praying through all this was, what can you do in the next 5 years that will last the next 50? Now I'm coming up on 5 years. I really don't know what happens after that 5 years. So I don't know if the Lord's going to take me home or if I'm going to lose my job. But it said, what can we do in the next 5 years that will last the next 50 years? And the only thing that kept coming to my mind is local church, man. Local church is that's what's going to be sustained, is planting and helping produce vibrant expressions of local church on college campuses or near college campuses that reach college students as their main priority. And for me, that was the big deal. And also to that was the particular demographic. As you think about a college student, they are so moldable, malleable. They're out from under mom and dad's network, largely school, the school authority and some of that kind of stuff. There's this freedom to life and they're able to make these choices. And so they're literally sitting at a crossroads, because I was there myself when I was 23 years old and I came to faith in Christ was just kind of around that college age years where I was sitting there asking the worldview questions. Who am I? What's my purpose? What am I made for? All those things. And I was so thankful that I had a gospel preaching, Jesus loving local church that said, shape your life around this. And Christ, obviously invaded my life, became Lord of my life, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And in a lot of ways, I was saved, not just spiritually, but I was just saved to actually live life how God, I think, meant it to be. And so, there's those two things of like, man, just the local church, as Ephesians 3 says, it is the manifold wisdom of God. It is this expression, the glory of God for people to see and be saved. But then also just this strategic period in a person's life where they are asking those questions and the church can meet them there. And not only that, I think that the college student is like probably one of the best kind of seasons in someone's life to make disciples, because they're hungry, they want to know, and that faithful, available, teachable, like a lot of them are made up like that, and you get the chance, to help change your life and set the trajectory. As Meg Jay in her book Defining Decade says, what happens in those college age years, 18 to 25, shapes the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of a person's life. And so there's so many different facets of it that really, I think for me, that I'm just convinced, even if, let's just say that I were to lose my job, I'd still figure out a way to do this, because I just believe it in my bones that college students are, I think, a big bang for your kingdom buck. I know it maybe sounds weird, but I just think it's one of the best ministries to invest your time and your resources into.
And I know, I mean, even outside of the context of specifically a church that's focused specifically on a college campus or reaching college students, I've seen that churches that do have thriving or intentionally focused college young adult ministries, that brings a whole lot of energy and passion into the church, that a church that is maybe, majority young families or older, folks is going to be lacking in some ways.
Yeah.
And God can work through whatever, but I think why would we not focus on this, like you're saying, such a strategic age range? Why not?
Totally.
What's there to lose?
You're right. They bring energy. And, some people even say, well, they don't bring finances. Well, you're discipling through that process. You're building the financial backbone of your church as you're investing in college students. So if you want to, because I mean, typically, and I'll say here in Texas, in fact, I was a part of a church, had a multi-million-dollar youth building. And then the minute they went from youth to college, they were stuck in the worst classroom on Sunday morning in the church. Like you're just like, whoa, what just happened here? We had indoor basketball courts. Now we got cobwebs in the corners, and has anyone ever vacuumed this place? It wasn't that bad, but really, and it's kind of like, it's almost like, hey, you realize just by the physical space that there's not much of a priority to invest in you at this point. And I think churches just do a disservice. Not to say that college students need an indoor basketball court, but they just need heavily investment by, adults that will love them, care for them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'll ask a question a lot of times to pastors. I'll say, name me the most important decisions you made in your life, and what ages were you when you made those decisions? And they'll tell me about career and dating and engagement and relationships and all these things that were 18, 22, 24, 26. You look at that, those moments where they, like you said, Mitch, is they shape the trajectory of somebody's life. And the question that I always wrestle with is, so if we know as a church leader that those are the most important decisions are being made in those years, why would we remove ourselves in that period versus step in, lean in, and disciple people in the midst of that? So I think that's so good.
Totally.
So here's a question. Maybe, I'm assuming we have some people are going to watch this and be like, oh, this is intriguing. I'm curious about collegiate church planning, or maybe you get people who are maybe a more established church says, okay, but maybe what does it look like for someone who's wanting to plant that kind of church, or a church that's existing, saying, hey, we want to kind of start focusing on college students, young adults, maybe. And I think probably all of us can speak into this. What are maybe one or two things that you'd say, start with this, start here?
Oh man, if you're in a church, I would just identify, who are the college students that are there, and I would just say start there and invest in them. And obviously, and I think I would say invest in them, and really, and I think by investing in them, I don't mean just like investing them outside of the formal ministry times. So if you have a 1 hour Sunday school class, that's awesome. Praise the Lord. Lead that class to the glory of God. But you need that student or those students at your dinner table at home. You need them doing extracurricular stuff outside of that time, because that's really when your ministry, the relationships in the community will be made. And really you'll see students really, I think, feel like being developed in their faith and really begin to develop even some leadership skills. Because for me, disciple making is two parts. It's high support and high challenge. So we want to support and love people super well, have them at our dinner table, let them know that, hey, regardless of whatever happens, I love you and will always love you. Students need to know that. But the second thing is challenge them to change the world. Like, because if it's just high support, you create a cozy culture. But if it's high challenge, that's a good disciple making culture. I know I'm loved and I know I'm challenged. And that is this kind of sweet spot for growth. And so that's what I would say is, whoever you got, man, love them like crazy, bring them into your home, have them around the dinner table or whatever, that kind of third space kind of idea. And then I would say over time, what you do is you build that equity to then begin to challenge them in their faith in different areas. And so that's where I would say start, because too, and this is typically what happens, because college students are such social beings that if you can create a great community environment, they're going to invite their friends into that environment. And your ministry will naturally and organically grow, and you'll reach people, not because you're going out and canvassing things, which that's not a bad thing at all. But you'll reach it because people realize the community of believers will actually attract them to your ministry. And that's really, because truly, I've seen it in college ministries all the time. Your ministry can truly double overnight just if there is a great, rich biblical community. In fact, Andy, as we were here at Sin Summit, I started asking those students, why are you here? Like, why did you choose to make Redeem your home? Every one of them said the rich community that was here. That's what's attracted to them.
Yeah, that's good. I think about, like, even because I've even talked to a couple churches here, even in kind of rural Texas, where they don't even have any college students to start with, and so even I think about those types of churches and how they can even begin to think strategically and missionally about how to engage with those spots. I think even one of the key things is just knowing where are the college and young adults in your community. And now, if you have a college campus, that's a huge opportunity. It's a strategic opportunity. But I would say even beyond that is even if you only have a 2-year college and they're all commuter students, there's still pockets of where they hang out. I even told a pastor one time where he said, well, there's not any college students in our town. And I said, well, the waitress is a college student, and the barista at Starbucks before was 3 of those were college students. And all of a sudden he looks around and is like, oh yeah, they kind of are. And a lot of times it's just a lack of awareness of realizing that they are there. And even what I tell people is begin to pray for those spaces and places. And then even in a simple way, if you don't have any college students start engaging with, man, frequent some place that does, like go to the same restaurant 2 times a week and have the same waitress who's a college student and start to build a relationship with her. Go to Starbucks or the local coffee shop that has college and get in a conversation with them. Just be active and realize where those opportunities are at.
Totally, man. No, I totally agree with that. And I think that's really the first place is obviously prayer and just being led by the Holy Spirit. Because I think there are more college students around most churches than they actually think they are. And I think sometimes we have to break this paradigm of saying there's not this robust, large campus with a lot of students centrally located. And it's like, okay, if we don't have that, we don't have college students, or we don't know. You just may have to identify where they're at. Like you said, where they hang out, Starbucks, the restaurant, those kind of things, and figure out, because it's likely there's these little pockets that are housing a lot of these students, and you just got to identify them. So I 100% agree.
What would you say, Ben, on that question?
Yeah, I mean, you guys kind of stole my good stuff. I think so. I guess building off of what you guys are saying, I think if you do have college students, young adults in your ministry, or even if you're in the process of planting a collegiate church plant, I think one of the best things you can do is have open and honest conversations about the hard topics. Because the tendency, I think, a lot of people assume like, oh, let's kind of avoid the challenging issues. But man, if you're working with college students, for the most part, they are eager to talk about and have conversations about those challenging issues. That's been a thing that we've done for the last year or so. Once a month ish, we'll pick what's a controversial hot topic that's in front of you guys. Our group is still mostly young adults. And we've had some great conversation. It's amazing how fulfilling it is for people to have conversations about hard topics in a space where we're saying, hey, this is going to be a kind, welcoming, loving conversation. Even if we disagree, we're going to learn how to do this thing, because particularly in our current moment culturally, most people don't have a place where they feel like they can talk about those issues. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, man, talk about an amazing thing that you could do within your established church. Or if you're planting something, wanting to reach college students, like, hey, let's pick what's the controversial topic. We're going to have a conversation. And the goal is not for the Christians to convince the non-Christians to believe what the Christians believe. The goal is just to be able to have an open conversation and learn what it looks like to dialogue about something that is challenging. And that's, people are going to get a taste of Jesus's love, in that kind of conversation.
Totally. And something that I would add to the whole collegiate church planning conversation is it's not like just this like niche of like, hey, I really like college students, so let's go reach college students. But when you think about advancing the gospel and the kingdom of God, and you see that throughout the scriptures, throughout the gospels, this DNA of disciple making that is multiplying. Jesus, he has his 12, and you see this eventually, obviously many come to faith, but you see this multiplication of disciples happening. I mean, I think that's what we need to take into consideration too, is if we want to build a multiplying ministry that is going to be beyond just our local expression of church, I think the college campus is perfect for that. Because you think about, if I'm reaching students, one, our ministry is growing, people are being saved, we're developing them, but also college students are naturally sent. They're naturally going to leave. And the question is how are they leaving? Are they a disciple? Are they a robust disciple as they're leaving? But what you can say is that, man, if you're planted here and you realize that we need to plant churches to reach more people, then what you can say is that, hey, if we're going to plant our college students that are leaving, why don't we cast a vision to say, hey, for the next 2 years, why don't you go get a job in a strategic location and plant a church with us, at this place right here. And I think it's a college ministry and multiplication are really a great marriage. I think there's really a lot that can happen there. So that would be, I would say that too, is it's not just like and that's why I'm not bought into collegiate church planning, because it's like, oh, I just love college students, which I do. But it's like, I really believe that this is, I believe in my heart of hearts that I think if we want to make an impact and move the kingdom needle, I think this is the place where we need to put time and energy and resources. And I believe that, to my core.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think we're at the 30-minute mark, so we hit it. So let's do this just to kind of wind down. Mitch, if people want to know more, if they got questions, what are some places they could find you to kind of connect with you to maybe ask some of these questions?
Yeah. If you're going to question me on Facebook, Mitch Tidwell, or Instagram or Twitter at Mitch Tidwell. We also have a called Roundup Network. It's our Facebook group. You can jump in there. We have conversations going on about it there. You can join that. It's just Roundup Network. We also have a blog podcast online that we'll talk about it on. Go to sbtexas.com/collegiate. We have the Roundup podcast. We have the Roundup blog that we'll write stuff on there. So that's all kind of our resource. That's my stuff. That's our resource hub. Would love to have, if you're watching this one, jump in on that. Would love to have you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, appreciate your time, Mitch, with us today. It's been a fun journey for these last several years, just partnering with you and being a part of impacting the lives of leaders and college students all over Texas and even beyond that. So appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, man. Appreciate you guys.
Okay. We'll see you guys later.
Adios.